yourself and start talking. So here's the recording. Please let me know in the chat if you can hear me okay. Just let's confirm that's working. So this is a presentation of Mindshop Knowledge Society, which so far has run several courses in philosophy. And I'm working on this project with my colleague Matthias, who is the originator and the organizer of Mindshop Knowledge Society. And what is a knowledge society overall? Well, it's an attempt to bring together people from all over the world, from different walks of life, to be able to study and discuss things that we're interested in. Let me just configure the screen properly. 1 second. Okay, so this is group CS2. So we'll have our lectures on Thursdays at this time. So it's 6:30 p.m. Mexico City time. And that's actually 12:30 a.m. midnight UK time. So I'm currently in London on the UK time zone. And this has worked quite well so far because I'm reasonably a night owl anyway. So we've had our CS1 course. We've had 10 weeks at this time, and it's been okay. And it's a very good time for our colleagues and our students in America or in Latin America because it's a much better time zone. It's a much better time slot. We can have the lecture around dinner time. So lectures will be on Thursdays. They're 1 hour, followed by 30 minutes of questions and anything you want to discuss. All the lecture recordings and the readings will be available on Google Drive. So from the beginning of the course, you'll get the readings, and then after each lecture, that lecture will be uploaded on Google Drive, so you can watch it back. Or if you have to miss the lecture for whatever reason, you can catch up on the recording. This is the number of Miriam. She's our Mindshop administration assistant. So if you have any questions or if you'd like to sign up, please add Miriam's number. You can just drop Miriam a message and she'll take you through the sign up process and explain anything that needs to be done. So Miriam is our very helpful organizer and she's our point of contact for everything. So feel free to add Miriam. And if you have any other questions around dates or anything else, Miriam can help you with that also. So what are we going to cover in today's session? We'll look first at the Mindshop vision. So what drives the Mindshop organization and what are we trying to do? Then we'll look at the structure of this course, CS2 Introduction to Cognitive Science, and we'll look at the course structure, what we're going to be studying on the course, and we'll go for a sample lecture, so you'll be able to ask questions and so on. The ethos behind Mindshop is that we can all learn better by getting to know each other. And this is especially important after COVID, when we've had a couple of years where we all had to learn independently, mostly sitting on our own. Especially in school and university settings, 2 years of students kind of missed out on being able to properly talk interactively. So with Mindshop, we aim to provide that experience for everyone. So Mindshop courses bring together lots of different professions, ages, home cities, and perspectives. And this is especially apparent in the seminars, when we get lots of different points of view from all of our different students. Here's a bit about myself. So I'm Fintan Nagle. They're both very Irish names. I'm UK based at the moment. I'm a cognitive scientist, and my background is in psychology, vision, so human vision, how we perceive the world, how the eyes and brain understand the world and do things like perceive faces and navigate. My PhD work looked at the perception of natural scenes, such as moving trees or water or flames. And since then, I've moved on into other areas of cognitive science. I've worked on automated driving. I'm currently working on the perception of motion in vision and on knowledge representation. So, how does the brain store facts? How does it retrieve information and put information together to say, plan what we're going to do next? I have lots of experience teaching. I really enjoy teaching. I find it's a very interactive experience, and I especially enjoy addressing questions from members of the audience and um, getting deeply into a particular topic. And that's what this course gives us the opportunity to do, both in the discussion sessions after each lecture and then in the weekly seminars. As I've mentioned, lectures will be in English. Discussion seminars will be in English as well. Uh, if you like, you can ask questions in Spanish. I understand Spanish fairly well, but I will be answering them in English. So lectures will be delivered in English, and feel free to ask me to slow down. I'll try and speak clearly and precisely, but of course, feel free to ask me to slow down if I get excited. So this is the mind shop vision to help form well-integrated people through continuing education, promoting thinking which is coherent, independent, and free from external agendas. So Mind Shop isn't sponsored by anyone. It doesn't push a particular agenda. We're trying to explore each of the topics that our courses cover in an unbiased and clear manner where we're allowed to ask any questions that we may have. So there's no such thing as a silly question. This is one of Matthias's favorite quotes. The mere repetition of any past experiences, even to infinity, never will arise any new original idea. In order to arise new ideas, we must create new experiences. We must weave our thoughts together. So this quote underlies some of the ethos of Mind Shop. Mind Shop goes back a few years now. So it began in 2015. And since then, Matthias has been spinning off more and more courses, first of all in philosophy, which is his specialist topic, and also in physics, mathematics, and now cognitive science as well. So Mind Shop has a reasonably long history of delivering courses like this. You should have already received the prospectus for Introduction to Cognitive Science, so giving you the topics of all the lectures and so on. We also have available the syllabus, which you'll get if you sign up to the course, and this shows you a more detailed overview of what's going on in the course. So we'll give a quick overview of what you get if you sign up to the course and what the course structure is now, and then we'll go into our sample lecture. So overall, the course includes 20 classes. So we have 10 90-minute lectures and 10 one-hour seminars. It runs for 10 weeks from 18th of January. We don't have a break because we don't have the Christmas break this time. So we'll just be going straight for 10 weeks. And these are our lecture topics. So we'll start off in week one, giving a broad overview of cognitive science. In week two, we'll look at language and mathematics, which are some of the other areas which are very linked to cognitive science. Shortly, we'll see that cognitive science brings together lots of different brain sciences and also other areas like linguistics and mathematics and physics. Not really chemistry, a bit of biology, but definitely language and mathematics. Once we've had a bit of a run up to the brain, in week three, we'll start to look at what we know about the brain. And we'll trace this, first of all, historically. So we'll start from what the ancient Egyptians and the Romans knew about the brain. In week four, we'll step away from the brain as well, again, and look at computation. Computation is one of the core concepts that we need to understand cognitive science, and it's one of the metaphors that cognitive science tries to use to understand the brain. It's been said that whenever humans come up with a new technology, they immediately say, "Oh, well, that must be how the brain works." And this has happened with steam, with hydraulics, with electricity, and now with computation. So computation is our most up-to-date metaphor at the moment for understanding how the brain works and what it does. With computation in mind, we'll come back to the brain again, and we'll see that most of what was discovered by the Greeks, the Romans, and up to the 19th century was actually mostly wrong. So once 1930, 1940 came along, we had a few more methods, imaging methods for looking inside the brain and seeing what's going on. Things like EEG, electroencephalography, and MRI, magnetic resonance imaging. So these allowed us to find out some more true aspects of the brain. For example, localizing where the visual system is, which parts of the brain do we use to see, or which parts do we use to do planning and decision making. Next, we'll step away from the brain again to look at artificial intelligence. So this is a very broad area, and it covers both AI that we use for science, such as brain imaging or brain scanning, and AI that we use for other purposes, such as large language models, or models that can write program code for us, like GPT-4. So we'll look at the history of artificial intelligence, the different parts and aspects of AI, and we'll see how AI can be used to understand the brain. For example, to decode what people are thinking about, or to actually read out a video image of what people are thinking about. And some very exciting things like this, mind decoding, the control of prosthetic limbs using thoughts is more and more possible. And these are very exciting topics. And these advances in AI allow us to model the brain better. So they allow us to come up with computer models of what the brain might be doing. And we can check these models against our experimental data to see if they're correct. And of course, they're all wrong at the moment because brain science hasn't really progressed very far towards really understanding what's going on, but they allow us to make advances. With all this in mind, in week 8, we're ready to look at perception. So how we perceive the world, how information from the external world comes into our mind via the sensory receptors, hearing, vision, and so on. And perception is one of the most well understood areas in cognitive science. So there's lots of exciting research there for us to look at. And in the final 2 weeks, we'll look at current issues in cognitive science, what the big discussions and arguments are in the field right now. And we'll look at the future of cognitive science, things like mind uploading, and will we ever be able to really understand everything that the brain is doing? We also have 10 tutorials. The topics here are a bit more flexible because you can ask questions about whatever you like. But these are the 10 topics for our tutorials. So if you sign up for the course, we're very happy to have you. And you'll receive a welcome letter, code of conduct, the introduction to cognitive science document, which is a 5-page overview of cognitive science as a whole, the course syllabus with full details about everything on the course. You'll get the readings and the links for the lectures and tutorials and the recordings when they come up. There's also a WhatsApp group. It's generally very active, so I'm constantly checking the WhatsApp group to respond to any questions that people may have. And we use the course WhatsApp group to share links and to ask questions and to say anything that we'd like to cover on the rest of the course. Okay, so we'll have a look now at each of the lectures in a bit more detail. So we have 10 weeks of topics. In each week, we'll focus the lecture and the seminar on each of these topics. And each week, in Mindshop, we operate a system called Nietzschean Sky, where each week there's a particular group of people whose job it is to ask questions in this lecture. And this is partially to make sure that everyone gets a chance to ask questions, and to make sure that everyone gets the chance to voice anything that's on their mind. And to explain this, Matthias has chosen this quote: "He who has much to proclaim one day stays silently much immersed within himself. He who has to kindle the lightning one day must for a long time be a cloud." So, of course, anyone can ask questions every week, but there's a particular group each week, the Nietzschean Sky group, who we encourage to voice anything at all that's on your mind. At the end of each weekly lecture, so we have 1 hour of lecture and then 30 minutes roundtable questions afterwards. These are generally quite busy, so we usually have a lot of questions after each lecture, and I'm very happy to address them in depth and to point people towards any additional learning resources or recent results which are relevant. This is Dale's cone of experience, and this shows us that to really learn about a topic, to really engage with a topic, we need to practice as well. And partially we do this by asking questions, but you also have the chance to prepare a group presentation as part of the course if you want to, or to do a presentation on your own, and to do a final essay at the end. And these are not compulsory at all. It's not, you don't have to do the group presentation or the individual presentation or the final essay. If you do, you have access to a completion certificate for the course. So if you do choose to do the essay and the presentations, you'll get a certificate at the end. So the course contains 10 lectures, 10 seminars. One is the group presentation seminar and the opportunity to do the presentation and the final essay. CS2 is very similar to previous Mindshot courses, most of which have been on philosophy, except for the fact that it's in English, apart from Spanish this time. And if you do fully complete the course, you'll get a certificate like this, but it's not necessary to do the final essay or the presentation. If you just want to come along and look at the lectures, that's and the seminars, that's fine as well. You also get membership to the Mindshop Knowledge Society. So there are various WhatsApp groups where we have discussion fora about different topics. There are debates, games, music groups, and so on, and lots of other events. So if you sign up, you will gain access to 10 1-hour lectures with 30 minutes discussion, 10 seminars, and the recordings and reading. We'll just remind you again, the lectures are on Thursdays, 6:30 p.m. to 8 p.m., so 90 minutes. And the seminars will be on Saturdays, either at 10 a.m. or 11 a.m. Mexico City time. There are some discounts. These are the full prices without discounts, and these we use PayPal, so these may vary slightly depending on the exchange rates at the moment, but these are approximate full prices. However, you get reduced early bird prices with a discount if you sign up before January the 18th. And these are the reduced early bird prices. So if you sign up for all of the course together, you can get a significant discount. And there are still some reduced prices after January 18th for another couple of weeks until we get to the full prices. So there are various discounts that you can avail yourself of. But if you're not sure about the course, you can sign up for the first half and then sign up for the second half later, or you can sign up for the whole course at once to benefit from a further discount. If you're already a member of Mindshop, then just let Miriam know when you contact Miriam. Okay, so let's do a bit of an overview lecture. So we'll go until about 7:30, and then there'll be the opportunity for questions. So if anyone has to leave at 7:30, that's fine, but I'll continue the session afterwards in case there are any questions or anything that I can go into in more depth. This is Francis Crick, one of the co-discoverers of DNA. And he said that there is no scientific study more vital to man than the study of his own brain. Our entire view of the universe depends on it. So he's saying that to understand our own minds, we need to understand our own brains. And this can change significantly how we see the world once we start to develop concepts like attention, and to understand how we are pointing our minds towards different stimuli. And once we start to become aware of things like the costs of task switching, if you have 100 things to do and you can do them in, say, batches of 10 or batches of 20, then there's much less overhead for task switching. Whereas if you're constantly switching between different tasks, there's a bit of a slowdown whenever you have to reconfigure your attention, and you might not notice this. Cognitive science is our attempt to understand how we understand the world. This is an electron micrograph of the hippocampus. So one of the brain areas that has a lot to do with memory, with remembering our personal experiences and with retrieving and bringing memories back into consciousness. And we can see here the cell bodies of some neurons in the hippocampus. So we're zoomed in very far now. This is less than a millimeter of brain tissue. And each of these colored blobs is the cell body of a neuron, which has been stained using a different chemical to look a different color. And then we can trace the rest of the neuron, the axons, these long filaments, which allow the neuron to move information to different places. So using electron micrographs and other brain imaging methods like MRI and good old anatomical dissection, we can get a good view of what the structure of the brain is and how these billions of cells, these neurons that we have in the brain, fit together. But how they actually operate together to create consciousness, to create problem solving, to create the visual experience that we see each day, and to do things like planning and decision making and reacting to incoming stimuli. That's something that's very much still an open question. And it's a very interesting situation to be in, um, because the brain isn't something that was designed by people. When we're reverse engineering, say, a car or a computer, then we're studying a system which was at some point designed by people. So when we reverse engineer it, we're going to be able to work out what that original design was, and it will be a design that's comprehensible and understandable to us. However, when we look at the brain, it's not clear that there even is a design. So this is a very messy system. It's a system that evolved. And when we ask, how does it work? How does it resolve these problems and sort out these issues? The explanation is more something that we have to create rather than something that we're going to discover. It's not like there is an easy blueprint somewhere for how the brain works. There is DNA, of course, but as we'll see later on in the course, DNA isn't a blueprint for the full brain. It doesn't explain how to set up a fully working brain. It just explains how to set up the proteins that you need. Then learning takes over, and the configuration of the brain from learning is much more important than whatever configuration it gets from DNA. Humans are creatures who take a long time to grow up, to reach maturity, compared to some other animals who are born more or less fully capable. They can immediately walk and find food and so on. It takes humans 15 years or so to reach full maturity, and this is because we have to do a lot of learning. Not all of the cleverness is in the DNA. So to sum up, cognitive science is our attempt to understand how these billions of neurons that we have in the brain work together to create the world that we feel that we live in. And this, of course, brings in many other areas. So cognitive science is closely connected to philosophy to psychology as well. It's kind of a superset of psychology. It's a psychology with added extras. In psychology, researchers are often wary of using mathematics or computer simulations, but in cognitive science, we're very happy to use all of the tools available. So this involves drawing from AI, using artificial intelligence and machine learning to make advances in cognitive science, neuroscience, what we know about individual neurons and how they work together. So that's more related to chemistry and biology. Anthropology, what we know about human behavior, and linguistics, how language works. Um, because, of course, humans work by communicating. Everything that we do is a collaborative activity. All of the key advances that we make involve communication and talking to each other. And by understanding language, we can go a long way towards working out what's happening in the brain. There are lots of other related fields as well, like logic, information theory, various other brain sciences. So down here we have all the different brain sciences, neuroscience, psychiatry, and so on. And there are loads of different nuances here, but I like to call them all brain science together. And what kinds of tasks does cognitive science try and explain? Well, it's everything that humans do, really. So about each of these tasks, there's a big sub area of research asking how does emotion work? How does consciousness work? That's one of the least answered questions so far. How does consciousness work? Or even can we clearly define what consciousness is? So we'll address that near the end of the course in lecture 9. Cognitive science is a reaction to behaviorism. So before we had brain imaging technologies like MRI and EEG, the prevalent way to try and understand the brain was behaviorism. That treated the brain as a black box. And according to behaviorism, we weren't allowed to ask what's going on inside. We weren't allowed to propose models for what might be happening inside the brain, or to say how the systems inside might work. And that made sense in the 1930s because we didn't have any brain imaging. We couldn't look inside anyway. We were just guessing. Now that we do have these tools, cognitive science allows us to open the black box of behaviorism. So to no longer treat the brain like a system that you can't look inside, and to actually be able to suggest possibilities for how it might work, and then to go and test them against experimental data. Cognitive science is closely related to philosophy because as soon as we start to study the brain, we have to admit that the brain creates our experience. So it might do this in different ways, and maybe we have a choice for how we see the world as being put together. In realism, for example, in the philosophical position called realism, we admit that, or we imagine that everything does have an independent existence in the world, even when no one is perceiving it. So similarly to the old question, if a tree falls in a forest and no one is there to hear it, does it really make a sound? And there are debates about realism, surprisingly, because although we all admit that an object exists in terms of the atoms and molecules which make up that object, what about higher level things like the meaning of the object? If I receive a letter, for example, then researchers mostly agree that the molecules and atoms in that letter all exist. But what about the high level linguistic patterns? What about the content of the letter, the words that are written there? How do the ideas there exist? Do they exist in the molecules of the letter, or do they have to be run through a brain or a cognitive system before we can really call them ideas? So there are lots of exciting philosophical questions like this involved in cognitive science. And unlike in psychology, which doesn't really have that many connections with philosophy, we're very much allowed to talk about them, and they inform how we think about research. And by the way, if anyone has any questions during this sample lecture, please feel free to put them in the chat or to raise your hand, and you can just unmute yourself and start talking if you like. I'm very happy to go into into a bit more detail about any of these topics, and we'll also have some time for questions in 25 minutes. So what big questions do we answer, or do we try to answer with cognitive science? How does my brain work? How do these 100 billion neurons that we all have produce things like emotion and curiosity and the drive to do things, or to go and fulfill our dreams, or to even to get out of bed in the morning and go to work? How do all these processes fit together, either on the low level, so small things like individual decisions, or on the more high level? How does my brain go wrong? How do we explain things like failures in memory, or making mistakes, associating the wrong name with the wrong person? Um, and how can we work against these? How can we use technologies that take advantage of cognitive science, such as spaced repetition in learning, which we'll come back to later, to improve brain function? Where does my brain come from? Both on the evolutionary level, how did the human brain evolve? Why is it the way it is? And on the personal level, why is my brain the way it is? How much of this is due to genetics? How much is due to the environment? How much is due to the choices I've made and the learning diet that we've absorbed so far? And finally, how does consciousness work? This is a big philosophical question as well. It's not really even easy to define exactly what consciousness is, but um, we all have an intuitive view that consciousness is what creates this world that we feel that we're living in. And when we imagine what it's like to be another person, we're simulating in our mind their consciousness. There's a famous paper called "What Is It Like to Be a Bat?" which looks at how bats, these small flying animals, use echolocation to see the world around them rather than vision. And so if you're conscious as a bat, your world will be made of echolocation rather than vision. Um, we haven't managed to answer all of these questions on the left yet. Sometimes we have to make the questions a bit more specific in order to actually address them with research. So which brain areas are associated with which tasks? This is relatively well answered. We know which brain areas are associated with vision, with hearing, with touch, with controlling movements, and so on. And one big motivation for cognitive science is, of course, to cure psychopathology, to cure brain issues or mind issues. Things like depression or schizophrenia, um, any any issues which can't be explained just by physical problems, just by, say, not having enough nutrients. So more complex problems which are due to more complex failures in how the brain systems work together. Um, this is a really interesting metaphor that I really enjoy for what research does. So imagine this circle containing all of human knowledge. So everything that humanity knows, which is, of course, a huge collection of information. And as you're learning, when you go through elementary school, you know a little, and everyone knows the same thing. We all know how to read, we all know how to write, we all learn about the same famous historical figures. In high school, we all study the same topics as well. Maybe we get to specialize a little bit. But when you do a degree, you start to specialize more. So you're no longer learning everything. You're pushing off in a particular direction to study what you find interesting. And when you do a master's, you specialize even more. So you're pushing towards the edge of knowledge. Once you start to read research articles that have come out in recent years, then we're actually now at the edge of human knowledge. So we're very specific. When you read a research article, it's like you've zoomed in very, very far to a particular topic. Then when you do a PhD, you focus on one particular area of the boundary and you zoom in. So you no longer know anything, or you're no longer interested in all of these other areas of the edge of knowledge. You're just interested in this tiny area of the boundary, which is your speciality. Then when you do a PhD, when you maybe publish an academic paper of your own, you push at the edge of the boundary and you slightly increase human knowledge. So this tiny dent that you've made is called a PhD. And you've zoomed in so far now that the world looks different to you now. You have a much closer conception of the unknown in your area, and you know a lot about this detailed area that you zoomed in on. But don't forget the bigger picture. You've only managed to make a tiny dent in the sum of human knowledge, and there's still a lot to do elsewhere. So this is really where cognitive science is at. It's the state of the art in understanding the brain. It's the state of the art in bringing in advanced technologies like AI and machine learning to try and make sense of all this brain data. And it's the area that's pushing the boundaries most in terms of brain science. Lots of advances are being made in other areas, of course. But for example, in neuroscience, researchers there spend a lot of time cataloging individual neurons and discovering how they work on the neuron level. And as we have nearly 100 billion of them, that might not help us to understand the brain as a whole. So we'll start our course by looking at some very old conceptions of how the brain worked. So this goes all the way back to 2000 BC or even 3000 BC with the get to 2500 BC or so with the Egyptians. And this is the first ever document on caring for someone with a brain injury that we found. And this is actually mostly correct. It gives some instructions on when the brain injury will be debilitating and when it's worth caring for that person. As we moved on to Roman times, they actually got a lot of things wrong. So these structures we can see here inside the brain, these blue structures, these are called the ventricles. And by the way, that's the brain stem there that points backwards. So you can see where's the front and where's the back. The brain stem comes in at the back. And these ventricles are actually just for shock absorption. So they're filled with liquid and they're just used for shock absorption. But the Romans thought that they were the site of intellect because when you cut the brain open, these are the first things that you see. You see these big spaces. Michelangelo was right about the brain as well. So in the Sistine Chapel, which we can see here, he's actually hidden in this area on the right, some parts of the brain. So this is like a section through the brain. That's the front, that's the brain stem. And we'll come back to this later in the course and look at what those structures actually are. But this is a hidden message in the Sistine Chapel, showing that Michelangelo was actually an anatomist as well. And here's the structures that he pointed out. Thomas Willis made some big advances in the 16th century. So he isolated the cerebellum or little brain, which we now know to be the part that manages motion, that manages things like reaching or grasping and walking and breathing. So the little brain, and this is a part of the brain that other mammals all share as well. This surface that you can see here, though, the cortex, the cerebral cortex, this is a part that's much more advanced in humans and that other animals don't possess so much. So the cortex, the bit on the outside, this is where we do all our high level thinking and all of our language processing and planning and decision making and things that other animals are perhaps not so good at. As we move through the 19th century, we start to get better at looking inside the brain. So once this is a drawing by Camillo Golgi from the late 19th century, And he was one of the first to isolate individual neurons. So again, we're looking at the hippocampus here, the same part as earlier, a brain area that has a lot to do with memory. And we're zoomed in very, very far, so we can see these individual neurons. There's the cell body of one of them, and there are some dendrites and axons coming out. So in week 4, we'll look at how neurons work, how they fire, how they send information down the neuron to the other end, and how they are the units of computation and of thought, how they work together to do everything that the brain does. Here's another electron micrograph showing some more neurons, and you can see their cell bodies and the dendrites and axons. So you can see they're all tangled up with each other. They're constantly talking to each other and firing and exchanging information. We have 100 billion neurons. Each one of them fires approximately once per second or so, more so if you're working on something that neuron is good at. And despite the fact that there are so many of them and they're all firing so quickly, that the brain is remarkably energy efficient. So compared to computers, which get very hot, these neurons are able to compute remarkably efficiently. We'll look at the structure of individual neurons. So we'll see that they're a bit like a battery in that they generate a sort of depolarization wave that goes down the neuron. They're not exactly like an electric current. And when that pulse gets to the end, it's transferred to the next neuron by the synapse. So this is an actual gap between the two neurons, and this is not bridged by electrical current, but by chemicals. So small molecules, neurotransmitters, are sent out from the first synapse, and they cross the synaptic boundary and are received by the second one. And this is where many drugs like SSRIs working against depression work. They get in here and they either inhibit the transmission or they enhance it. So along a neuron, there's electrical transmission, and then over to the next neuron, there's chemical transmission. And this is all going on, of course, in all of our brains right now. This is a famous neuropsychological patient, Phineas Gage, and he was unfortunately victim of an industrial accident in the late 19th century. And this iron bar was propelled through his skull by an explosion. He survived the accident. He survived for several decades afterwards, and he had the metal bar removed. Here he is holding it. You can see the damage that it caused to his skull here. And this was very surprising at the time because he was still able to go on functioning more or less as normal. So this showed us that you can lose a large brain area and still have more or less good function. But he did have some deficits after that. He was a bit less reliable. He was less able to plan and to keep appointments and so on. And that showed us that the front of the brain here, or that suggested anyway, which research then confirmed later on, that the front of the brain has a lot to do with decision making and planning. That's the prefrontal cortex. So here's the frontal lobe. The brain has 4 lobes. The occipital lobe is at the back near the occipital bone. The temporal lobe is at the side. And we've managed to characterize what these lobes do, which functions are located in each area. For example, the visual cortex is at the back. But as we'll see in week 5, functional localization is not the be all and end all. Once you've discovered where a certain function is localized in the brain, that doesn't really tell you anything about how it works. And especially if you want to build an AI system or a machine learning system that copies the brain and that does intelligent things too, just knowing where that attribute is located doesn't really help you. It's like if you want to build a car, you don't understand how to build a car, and you're studying existing cars to try and do it. If someone tells you that the engine is at the front, that doesn't really tell you how to build an engine, just knowing where it is. So around the outside, we've got the cortex, but inside, we have these structures in the limbic lobe, which do more basic functions like breathing, like keeping the heart beating, like waking and sleeping. And these are functions that we share with other animals. So we'll explore the idea that we have essentially an animal brain inside the human brain, and that's something that we share with lots of other primates and even lots of other mammals. But the cortex around the outside, that's something that we share definitely with other primates, but not so much with dogs and cats, mice, and so on. This is EEG, a brain imaging method, and in week 4 or 5, we'll look at these relatively new methods that allow us to see inside the brain. EEG allows us to measure electrical currents being given off by all these neurons which are firing, and we can use that to evaluate what different parts of the brain are doing. This is the first MRI scanner. So this is the big circular magnetic machine that you lie inside. It's often used for medicine, for things like if you have a back problem, you can get a physical scan. But functional MRI allows us to look at what neurons are firing as well. So to see particular brain areas glowing on the scanner image when they're doing more thinking, when they're performing more work. So we can do a structural scan. This just tells you what the anatomy is, and here we're moving through the head from side to side. So we can really see all the structures in the center of the brain here as we zoom through the center, and we can see the eyes and so on. And here in the center, you can see the corpus callosum. There's the brain stem. There's the cerebellum at the back. There's the visual cortex, and there's the prefrontal cortex there. We can also do functional MRI. So if we do an experiment where we're showing people some faces and some images of faces and also some images of houses, then we can take the the parts of the scan where they're looking at houses and add them all up. And we can see that these brain areas in blue are activated more by faces, and the areas in red are activated more by houses. So we can find out, again, functional localization, which parts of the brain process houses in relation to faces. And we can find various different brain networks, like the default mode network activated by daydreaming. And we can characterize which other brain areas make up these networks. So one thing that we use a lot in cognitive science is machine learning. And here we're using machine learning as a mathematical model to help with MRI decoding. So this is actually decoding what someone's looking at from the brain. And you can see here the actual movie that they're looking at and the reconstruction. So the reconstruction is still not very good, but it's successfully reconstructed there that there's a person, and there that there's a sort of sky scene with something, with an aircraft, something going on in the middle. And it's not really come across down there that it's an aircraft. But this was still 5 years ago now. This method is improving all the time, and it really is remarkable that we're able to read out, still in quite a blurry way, but without even that person making a language report, we're able to figure out what they're looking at. So this is this paper, Reconstructing Visual Experiences from Brain Activity Evoked by Natural Movies. And we'll spend a lot of time looking at modern cutting edge research papers and asking, do they really do what they say they do? We'll also spend some time looking at language, looking at the history of language. This is one of the first examples of notation of something being written down from 5,000 years ago. And we'll see how in the 20th century, linguistics and cognitive science really started to come together. Noam Chomsky, one of the biggest researchers of the 20th century, he's made advances in linguistics, but also in computer science, showed us that there are several different rankings of language and showed us for the first time how computer science can understand language. We also use mathematics extensively in cognitive science to do modeling. So we look a bit at the history of mathematics, for example, the history of symbols. And we'll see that it took a very long time for us to even go from plus to minus and to allow zero. And then we had a big explosion of mathematical symbology later on. We'll do a lot of talking about visual perception, which is both my research area and it's humans' most important sense. One of the most interesting ways we can look at visual perception is through illusions. So here it definitely looks like we have a green spiral here and then a blue spiral here, but these are actually the same color. And it's really hard to believe, but if we put them together, we can see that these bits that look green here and these bits that look blue here are actually the same color. So if you just look at the edges, it makes sense. But if you look here, you get this kind of cognitive dissonance feeling where they seem at once to be the same color and different colors. And illusions like this show us how the visual system is tuned to the visual environment that it grew up in. Here you'll see some illusory motion that's not really there. And here as well, you see some illusory dots, which are not really there. Whenever we see an illusion, something that's not really there, it's evidence that the visual system is filling something in for us. Usually, of course, this is useful. Usually, this helps with things like perspective or color constancy to make colors seem the same, whether it's full daylight or twilight. This is visual search. If we're looking for something that stands out, this one stands out because it's rotated, but one, for example, just with a red crossbar doesn't stand out on its own. So we can use visual search tasks like this to characterize what vision can do. We'll look as well at the anatomy of the eye. It's essentially a camera with a lens, and we'll look at the visual system. So brain science has been able to extensively characterize the visual system. A lot of it is located at the back of the brain here, where we have all these different visual areas, and we've been able to map it out and show that there are two streams of visual information, the what stream and the where stream, which go to different brain areas. And we can find interesting things in cortex like visual field maps. These show which directions this area of the cortex is sensitive to, and that's again 1 millimeter, so we're zoomed in quite far. We'll look at other senses like audition and smell, olfaction as well. And we'll see that we understand auditory cortex quite well as well. We'll look at common debates in cognitive science, like attention. How does attention work? What kinds of experiments can we use to study attention? This is the Posner paradigm, where you tell the participant that the target will be either on the left or the right, and then you see how that information helps them. And we'll see how attention relates to consciousness. Consciousness is, of course, the hardest question for brain science, and it's the one that we're furthest away from answering. But as we work upwards from the low level, from vision to attention to consciousness, we're getting there gradually. And we'll look at some famous papers such as the Libet experiment, where we're using EEG to predict when someone will press a button. And if you can predict that someone's going to do something before they know that they will, what does that tell you about consciousness? Finally, we'll look at some computer models which could explain how the brain works. So this is a model that puts together concepts to classify things. And we'll see how modern technology like knowledge representation in computer science is both inspired by how the brain works. So things like large language models like GPT-4, they're inspired by first the fact that we use lots of identical neurons to work everything out, and also by the fact that we use attention. So we'll finish up with the sample lecture shortly, and then we'll move over to some questions. I'll just say some of the most recent advances that we'll be looking at, grid cells and place cells. These were discovered only a few years ago. These are cells that fire when you're in a particular place or when you're facing in a particular direction. So this was a recent Nobel Prize. And we'll ask how the discovery of cells like this can help to explain consciousness. We'll look at computer science as well, from the first programmer to people like Alan Turing, who developed computer science in the 20th century. And we'll ask, is the brain a computer? How can these ideas that we've got from computer science explain what the brain does? Here is the first model of an individual neuron, which just adds up its inputs and then generates an output or not. And we'll ask, how can the processing architectures that computers use, that we all use in our laptops and phones, how do they relate to how the brain works? Can we ever simulate the brain on a computer? Would that be possible? How much computation do we need? Marvin Minsky, one of the pioneers of artificial intelligence, thought that we could. He thought this would be very easy to solve in the 1960s, but we haven't solved it yet. We have got some artificial intelligence systems working really well. This is AlphaGo, which can beat the current world champion in Go. So they are getting better than humans in some ways, but we're still able to do metaphors. We're still able to do analogies, and connectionist systems, artificial intelligence systems, aren't necessarily doing everything. And we look at advanced new theories like neural field models, where we're modeling thoughts essentially, not using the computer model, but using just mathematical equations. And we look at some very exciting possible new technologies which are not quite here yet, like uploading one's mind. So overall, cognitive psychology and cognitive science is the intersection of lots of different areas, and it's the part of research and science that has the best chance of explaining how the brain works. Not anytime soon, of course, but we're still answering some very interesting questions and making some very interesting discoveries. Okay, thanks for your attention. So we'll move into questions now. If you're interested in signing up for the course, please add Miriam's number. She'll guide you through the process. So we'll open the floor now for any questions that anyone may have, and I'll just stay on until we've dealt with all of those. So I'm very happy to answer anything about any of the topics we've covered. Is anything on the course? What do I research personally? And I'd like to hear your experiences or any relevant comments you have as well. So I'll open the floor now for questions. If you have a question, feel free to raise your hand and unmute yourself. I will also stop